If I put a plate of kale in front of you, a plate of blueberries, or a steak in front of you, which one has the most nutrients in it? The steak does. 1,000 times more than kale or blueberries does. And it doesn't have any anti-nutrients like oxalates that the kale has in it.
How do you help people overcome some hurdles when they're transitioning to, say, a carnivore diet?
If you give them 14 days and be like, in 14 days, you have a new set of taste buds, you will change what you crave. So many people are living in this adrenal fatigue world, and you could take all the adrenal supplements you want, but the most important thing would be
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Emmy Brown, here with my wonderful co-host, Melissa Gentile. Today, we're thrilled to have Maria Emmerich with us, founder of Maria Mind Body Health and KetoAdapted.com. Maria's personal journey from struggling with health and weight issues in her youth to becoming a passionate nutrition expert is nothing short of inspiring. Maria is not just any nutritionist. She's an international best-selling author with over 20 books to her name, including hits like Quick and Easy Ketogenic Cooking and the 30-Day Ketogenic Cleanse. And her work has been featured by celebrities such as Halle Berry and Al Roker. Join us today as Maria shares her incredible insights on how food can enhance mental wellness, support autoimmune conditions, and promote overall health. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of her newest, latest, and greatest developments. Super excited for this one. Hello and welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for asking me to be on. It's such an honor. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so your books have an impressive following, to say the least. Will you tell us what inspired you to start writing?
Oh man, it's not a short story, but what happened was I was sick when I was younger. And so when I was diagnosed with PCOS and all these other things, I was given 3 very powerful prescription drugs at only age 16. And I was like, I don't want to take these. And there wasn't the internet back then. It was a long time ago. And looking up what causes PCOS, because being told you can't have your own children is kind of like a big bomb dropped on you. It's excess caffeine, sugar, and carbohydrates. And at the time I worked at a coffee shop where before I'd go to high school, I'd go to the coffee shop and I would make the scones and the muffins and the cinnamon rolls. And then after school, I would go back and whatever didn't sell, I got to go home with. Okay. And so I knew what days like the cinnamon rolls would sell a lot. So I would make extra just because I wanted that. Yeah, I wanted that, right? And so I had to I didn't want to eat chicken breast and broccoli. I really did not. And so I just recreated some of my favorite things like cinnamon rolls into these low carb, protein packed things. And what happened was I was married before I could legally drink alcohol. And I told my husband, Craig, that I probably couldn't have children. And he's like, that's okay. Let's adopt. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And so we started adopting 2 children. And during that time, I graduated college and I was, a nutritionist, but I was like, I'm just going to be a stay-at-home mom. That's what I want to do. And so I was a rock climbing guide, like making like $8 an hour. And my husband, he was the one, making the money, and he lost his job. And if you know anything about adoption, I'm sorry, this is a long story. If you know anything about adoption, you know that when you lose a job with insurance and all of that, all the money you put into it kind of goes back to zero, because once you do get another job, they have to do all of their studies or whatever they're doing on you again. So it was intense. And someone said, well, Maria, why don't you just put your recipes into a book to help raise money for your adoption? I was like, oh, okay, that's a really good idea. And why don't you start a blog? And it's like, what's a blog? This was 15 years ago. There's no blog out there. And I was like, wow, that's a really good idea. So I didn't even have a computer. And we lost our cars because we couldn't afford them. And so I was riding my bicycle to the library to write. And I might get a little emotional, but it gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. And I love telling my teenagers how much they were loved before they were in our home, because we just put everything we did into that. And I still, our money, I'm just so grateful that it was for the adoption, and we'd like to help other people that are in the situation we were in. Anyway, I won't get into that, but it was really, it was all written in the stars, I think.
Well said. Yes. So let's get into what were you writing about? At that point, you were eating primarily a ketogenic diet. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. I've been eating keto for 27 years now,
Wow.
27 and a half. And I kind of just, I wrote some that were cookbooks, and then I wrote some educational books. And one was called Keto Adapted. And it was kind of just my journey and how all the mistakes I made, and like the calorie counting and the point counting and all the things that didn't work for me, and the struggles with PCOS and what that did to me emotionally and stuff. I didn't think anybody was going to read it. So it was kind of like a diary, right?
Sure.
And people just really, they loved it. It was self-published, and we sold it on Amazon and everything. I was like, wow, people really like it. So I just kind of kept going. I say we because my husband helped me a lot with putting it into an ebook format and stuff.
And what was it like going through that diagnosis as well? I mean, sometimes we can feel victim to a diagnosis. And was there kind of a time period between the diagnosis and then changing your diet where you were kind of in a limbo stage where like, what do I do next?
Yeah, I mean, I was really frustrated because the doctor, she told me it was nothing I was doing wrong. It was the cards I was dealt. And I was like, oh, dude, come on.
Which
You
is the
know,
worst answer because then you feel like you can't do anything.
Powerless.
Yeah.
right. She was acting kind of like my friend, I think. And I was like, well, no, I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to hear some tough love and what I needed to do. So I had to do my own research. And it was right away because I mean, I'm a stubborn girl. Like what happened was I had a beautiful golden retriever, and she was losing patches of her hair. And so I took her to the vet, and this was the same week, mind you. And when I took her to the vet said, "What are you feeding her?" And I was like,
Light bulb moment.
a light bulb moment. The doctor never asked me what I was eating, right? And so I went home and we basically changed her diet overnight. She, I gave her raw beef, which is like the raw diet for dogs, is like super healthy. Her hair grew back right away. And for me, it was a process finding out, like, I'm so glad I didn't go through this keto phase now because of all the keto junk you find at Costco and stuff. Everybody slapped their name on keto, right? For me, it was like, okay, I'm eliminating bread and pasta and rice and all the things. I actually had to lie and tell people like my family that I had a gluten allergy. I didn't even know what gluten was. But I knew that it was carbs, right?
Yeah.
And so they would make stuff with rice. I was like, I can't eat that. And they're like, well, there's no gluten in rice. I was like, oh, there's not. I like didn't even know any of this. So this was back when I was 16. So there's a lot of learning, but I was just like, yeah, I'm just eating the protein. And I think that's a big misconception too of what people are doing. There's different types of a ketogenic diet. There's a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which is when I work with somebody with seizures or, Alzheimer's. But when it comes to people that have diabetes, they need to lose weight. When they have type 2 diabetes, they need to shrink the fat cells and gain or at least maintain their muscle mass as they lose weight. And so for them, I'm going to do a totally different diet because they need to focus on protein and low fat, where someone with epilepsy or seizures, we do know that higher ketones do matter, which they don't for losing weight. There's no correlation. So I would push more fat and probably lower the protein for somebody with epilepsy, because I do know that too much protein will probably keep those ketone numbers lower. But when somebody's trying to lose weight, protein is really important, and too much fat is going to cause you to gain weight. So there's like this big controversy with these, kind of newbies to the keto or carnivore diet that are like eating butter on top of a ribeye. And I'm like, ooh, that's too much, right? So anyway, I digress with that. They're just, when you're working in the trenches with people, you see how I posted a picture last night with somebody that was on Instagram. She posted her before after picture. She sent it to me and she's like, yeah, I got stuck in that high fat carnivore life, people promoting it. And she gained weight and was really frustrated. And then within a month, she quickly lost the weight, focusing on protein and low fat. And I'm not saying no fat. I'm just saying you don't need 100 grams, 200 grams. They're just too much.
Right. We're going a little crazy with all the coconut oil, MCT oil, butter on everything. Yeah, I can definitely see how it could be a little bit too much for some. And do you advise a lot of lifestyle changes? Or I'm curious too, even in your own journey, was it purely just diet? Like I know you focused a lot on diet, but what other lifestyle habits did you have to alter?
Do you remember having to run the mile in school?
Yes.
Yeah.
My mom remembers I tried to break my leg so I didn't have to do that. So much I did not like to
Mhm.
exercise. I did like sports. I was pretty good in sports, but it was more like the fun aspect of sports I liked, the social aspect. So I did start to learn how to love to exercise. It wasn't an overnight process, but I did know I loved to be outside. And so I would just throw some snowshoes on and like go outside and listen to my favorite music. And I learned to love that. And so I think that was something that was really important. When you get down, something bad happens in your life. Some people have a coping mechanism that they go towards food, right? And I was definitely one of them. And I had to learn to find something else to cheer me up. And like going outside in nature and just exploring was my way of like, I still do that. When something bad happens, I just love to get outside and do that. But I learned I started to love to run. And I've even run marathons in a ketogenic state. So that was something that I did totally change that. I mean, I also there's so many other biohacking. I already did sauna this morning, cold therapy this morning, like lifted weights this morning. Like I've learned to love those things because I think too, like once you accomplish one goal, you want to find another, like you want to keep
keep moving, keep progressing.
Yeah. So I'm still doing that,
Very cool. And you kind of just teased this, Maria, already in terms of the ketogenic diet, as I think the public knows it, where you have to be very careful counting your macros to get into ketosis. I think sometimes people are even measuring ketones in blood or urine, but that's different than kind of what you're focusing on now, correct? As far as you just said, someone who has diabetes and they're trying to lose weight, what does that look like? Are they counting their macros? Is this sustainable? I'd love to hear about more detail on what you're really advocating for now.
I do want to say, you talked about like testing your ketones.
Yeah.
Again, first of all, if you're like worried about if you're in ketosis or not is one thing, but if you're like worried about like being a higher ketone number, it's not going to help with your weight loss goals. And if you're testing them with urine, you're going to get real frustrated real quick because it only will show that you're in ketosis in the beginning because it's not testing beta hydroxybutyrate. It's basically once you get dehydrated, it's not going to show that you're in ketosis anymore. So it doesn't work after about a week. So it's a very poor form of testing. It's, easy and cheap and you don't have to prick your blood, but don't do that. But when it comes to macros and stuff, yeah, that's something that people get really frustrated and confused about. So I do it for them. So I will give you your macros, but then I'm going to give you like this recipe tool maker and you can just pull things in and it automatically calculates. So if it doesn't match your macros, you can kind of move it around and it just fits what would be for you.
Is that an app?
It's my website.
Okay. Very cool. So it's your app.
Basically, it's not an app, but it is my website. Yeah. It's my husband created it. So what's really cool about it too is you can filter if you're dairy free, which I do suggest for weight loss. You click the button for dairy free, nut free, egg free, nightshade free. You can pick whatever you want, and it would just filter all my recipes to fit what you need to do. But I think that takes a lot of the guesswork out because you still have thousands that could fit in your macros. And what you could also do is say, I need some recipes that are lower in fat or higher in fat, whatever you want. Some people need higher. Or protein, you can switch that too, and then it will just still filter them down. So it takes kind of the guesswork out, and it's still like really delicious, And I do suggest that people are, I get people that are 500 pounds and they need to lose hundreds of pounds. Protein sparing modified fasting. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That can be very effective, and it sounds like you're limiting protein, but it's not. You're focusing only on lean proteins and lowering the fat and carbs. And it sounds really boring, like, chicken breasts. But I mean, I even have a Wendy's Frosty that's protein sparing. So it can make it really fun and delicious.
Actually, Maria, that was going to be one of my questions coming up is what is a protein sparing modified fast? Because I saw that term, I think, on one of your Facebook groups. So is that something that's long-term or is it something to like kickstart a program? Like, what does that look like? And what are the benefits to it?
I probably should have stuck with the original term. In that first book I told you about, Keto Adapted, I talked about my pure protein days because weight loss was very difficult for me. I did eventually lose 80 pounds, but in the beginning it wasn't happening. And so for me, my pure protein days were a lot of protein and low fat and low carbs. And so it would be, anything that fits those macros. So like it would be chicken breast, but you could make it more interesting. Lean ground beef, egg whites, things like that. Any seafood, even salmon, even though it's a fattier fish, would fit a protein sparing macro. And so then protein sparing modified fast, that is actually like the technical medical term that a lot of doctors and hospitals will use before someone goes to bariatric surgery, because you do lose weight quickly. The way they do it is you would eat protein sparing modified fast, which is basically like, all protein, maybe 800 calories of protein. That's it. So it is a very low calorie diet. They would do this for a few weeks before surgery. I don't suggest doing that day after day after day. I would say maybe 2 days a week, possibly 3. I had Tyler, who was 650 pounds. He could push his protein sparing days longer because he had a lot of fuel on his body to use. And that's something that people don't realize. You could use the fat on your body to make ketosis happen, right? It doesn't have to be dietary fat. So I usually suggest 1 to 3 days a week you do protein sparing, and then the rest of them would be your regular keto macros. And then I do suggest 1 overfeeding day. And this is not a Pizza Hut day, but it would be like your maintenance macros, just more fat, more calories, and it kind of just messes with your body a little bit.
Is that day still low sugar and no carb, or no sugar, no carb? Okay.
It would be your maintenance macro. Yeah. And I still suggest dairy free if you really want to have the maximum benefits, because dairy was something I had to cut out for my weight loss. I don't have autoimmune. I have it now, but it definitely is something that I see so many people that are stuck. And yeah.
And what are your thoughts on this kind of thing about intermittent fasting? Do you recommend that with some of your clients? Do you practice it, or is it not really matter to you?
I don't force it, but it's something that happens naturally. And let me tell you why. So hunger happens with a falling blood sugar. And when you're eating this way, your blood sugar is staying nice and even. This is like, do you remember, or like being hangry, where you're so hungry, you're angry, right? I remember that in high school. But when your hunger is very even, you naturally don't, or when your blood sugars are even, your hunger doesn't, you'll get hungry, but it's something bearable. You're fine. You could like go another hour, especially if you cut out coffee, if you want to talk about coffee. But my kids,
yes, definitely.
they naturally, like, they might, if I don't make them, they won't eat until like noon or 1 o'clock, and I'm like, come on. And they're like strong growing boys, they're teenagers, but it's just something that kind of naturally happens. If a lot of people will not skip breakfast and then they'll eat lunch and dinner. I suggest switching that if you want the maximum benefit. And the reason is, especially if you're working out in the morning, you want that muscle building. I don't intermittent fast at all anymore, really. But what it's kind of a long story. People pick on me for my size. So with intermittent fasting, it would be ideal to switch that to a morning and a lunch, and then cutting it off earlier. And the reason is the human growth hormone is naturally high when you fall asleep, about 30 minutes after you fall asleep, but it doesn't happen if insulin is present. And even if you eat pure fat, insulin is going to rise some. And so it is best to like have your meals earlier and not like right before bed, and because it does a lot with your heart rate and stuff, and you sleep better. So
it's actually really interesting, because I've noticed that if I eat late at night, I use an Oura ring to track my heart rate and HRV throughout the night. It will not be great if I'm eating too big of a meal like later in the evening. So I feel like the effects on sleep are just massive. And yeah, I do see a lot of the intermittent fasting community kind of doing the opposite, like waiting into eating breakfast, at 12, 1, 2 p.m. So that's really interesting.
So true.
Especially like to hit the leucine threshold, like you want to signal muscle protein synthesis when you wake up, or like towards the morning. So that's why that's important, of getting like, 30, 40 grams of protein in the morning.
I'd love to know, Maria, if you're working out in the morning. And I think a lot of people tend to do that. I like to get it out of the way, knock it out. And I don't want to work out after a typical breakfast, especially a protein-rich breakfast. So what do you recommend before that workout? Are you recommending a little tiny snack, or, nuts, seeds, something?
I personally can't, like, I do not enjoy working out with a full stomach either. So as long as it happens afterwards, is, very helpful.
Anything
Important.
before, though, do you recommend, depending on the individual?
I usually have a couple supplements I recommend, but again, that would depend on the person. But you don't have to, but it could just like speed things along or help things along. So,
And that's a fasted workout.
yeah, I've run marathons fasted.
Wow.
I'm not recommending that. I'm not recommending that, but I have.
But just kind of like maybe a 30-minute weight training session, do it fasted. Is there a benefit to that? I imagine I've heard a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I know that some people are going to say like, oh, you should always eat beforehand, but there's something about you can build your mitochondria, make them more stronger in a fasted state. So when you keep your insulin low too, like you can burn more fat. Obviously with strength training, you want to build muscle. But when it comes to that, it would be more of the mitochondria side. Like when mitochondria uncouple, like the more mitochondria you have, the more energy you have, the more fat oxidation you have. Like it's all a good thing. And most people are killing their mitochondria with the way they're living. It's really sad. But that's why but I feel heavy. I feel like, oh, I just can't do it. Even like strength training, I don't like it. So, as long as and I do recommend always working out in the morning. And for reasons for that is cortisol is naturally high in the morning. That's what wakes you up, right?
Right.
And it should fall throughout the day. But if you do a hard workout after work or something like that, your cortisol is going to go high. Again, it's going to mess with your sleep. Do you ever notice that with your Aura Ring? I don't wear one.
Yeah, like I've noticed, like even if it's like 5 or 6 p.m., I'm not working on super, super late. But yeah, if I spike my cortisol, I'll see my stress on my ring go up really high. And I notice it'll be like 11 p.m. and my heart rate's still up and I'm not tired and I'm still, on that high from the workout still. So I can definitely see, some truth to that. To working out in the morning is probably a lot better just for our circadian rhythm and just, how we work biologically.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. So that's just another reason I would suggest working out in the morning. I understand not everybody's a morning person, but it is helpful.
And that's a whole nother conversation as far as sleep. And before I forget, the caffeine piece.
Thank you for asking. I do want to pull on that thread too.
Yes. Can we talk about caffeine and how does caffeine fit into all this, and maybe timing of caffeine? I can guess what you're going to say, but please.
Well, not everybody likes this part of my life. I wrote a whole blog post about why I don't drink coffee anymore. And I worked at a coffee shop. I had like an IV of caffeine in my arm.
Me right now.
When you look into first of all, mold is a huge issue. When people are not feeling better, despite what they're eating, despite how they're sleeping, working out. Like I've had so many people I couldn't figure out what's going on. Turns out it was mold, in their home, whether it be the carpet, the upholstery. But coffee has a lot of mold in it. I don't care who you are. Dave Asprey might say his coffee doesn't have any mold in it, but it does, right? It's just the process of how they make it. So mold is an issue. It messes, it's going to increase blood sugar. So this is why when you drink coffee, your hunger might go away for a little bit. Do you ever notice that?
But then it comes back like crazy.
Raging.
I was going to say 4 or 5 hours after a coffee, my appetite is I'm shaky. My blood sugar feels low. I'm I didn't even eat any sugar and I feel crazy.
I don't care if you're eating keto, carnivore or not. You're going to feel that way that's what caffeine does. And that's why it takes your hunger away right away. But again, usually the cravings are much worse that day. I've had people that they always had a little piece of dark chocolate and they just couldn't get rid of it. They cut out coffee. They were able to stay away from that craving. But then when they added it back in, then it comes back. It also increases anxiety, which let's talk about our mental health. That's not good for anybody. What else? Gastroparesis. It causes gut issues. There's a lot of studies on that. Blood pressure, increases blood pressure. It messes with your sleep, and nobody sleeps good anymore. I love it, but so when you look into the end, usually my clientele is postmenopausal women, most of them, right? And their weights they have a very hard time losing weight. Caffeine is one that that's the only thing I changed, and boom, 3 pounds in a week.
Wow.
But also once you go through menopause, if you don't go on HRT, which I do recommend, which we can talk about that, you're going to be much more insulin sensitive. Your insulin sensitivity is going to be worse. And so things like caffeine and alcohol are going to affect you much more than they would in the past.
I was going to ask too, just from a hormonal perspective and just how caffeine peaks cortisol even more, especially if we're having it right away when cortisol is already supposed to be rising. And if you're doing a workout on top of that too, that's a lot, a lot on the adrenal system first thing in the morning. And I've heard a lot of other PCOS individuals cutting out caffeine because from what I understand, there's a link there. Did you feel like that was a big piece of your healing journey from PCOS?
So it's something I didn't take very seriously until about 15 years ago. I am very old. When I was going through the journey, I cut out sugar and carbohydrates, but I knew the caffeine part. Sugar, carbohydrates, and caffeine, huge with too much androgens in a female body. But I didn't cut out the caffeine. I don't know why that was I cut out dairy, but I couldn't cut out caffeine. But then once I did, man, it just was a whole nother like part of healing for sure. But I slept because sleep was always an issue with the PCOS. But yeah, we could talk about like adrenal fatigue too. So many people are living in this adrenal fatigue world, and you could take all the adrenal supplements you want, but the most important thing would be get good sleep. You probably need like 10 hours to get your adrenals to like rebalance. Cutting out caffeine, and I wouldn't recommend heavy exercise at all. Go for a walk, yoga.
Right. What about maybe adaptogens? I feel like I'm reading between the lines a little bit here, Maria, as a replacement for caffeinated beverages. Is there anything that you like to recommend? There's some, bitter Ticino tea, herbal replacement type things.
They did send me some of that a long time ago. My kid liked it. But what I would just say, this is how I cut it out. Do you know what an Americano is?
Sure.
So an Americano is a shot of espresso with hot water, right? And it tastes way better than coffee does. And a shot of espresso, people think it's like so caffeinated, but it has less caffeine in a cup of coffee. It's about 50 milligrams, 200 milligrams for a regular cup of coffee. So what I did was I switched to that. And then I switched to a decaf Americano rather than a decaf coffee, because decaf coffee is made with a chlorinated filtration process, and chlorine is really bad for your thyroid. And decaf espresso is made with a water filtration process. So I switched to a decaf Americano. And then by the time, that's like such little caffeine, it wasn't even the caffeine I wanted. It was something warm. And so then I switched to like herbal tea. And now I just want like cold ice water. I got really into cold therapy for a while. So I can't hot, but it's just a personal thing. But maybe like the caffeine isn't even, you don't even care about that. It's just something hot. Then again, you could be like herbal tea or something.
Sometimes I've noticed, like even in the mornings, I just need the aroma. I just need to smell the coffee, hold the
and
mug,
the ritual of it.
Yeah, it's the whole practice that's just so habitual.
Well, my children, we adopted them from Ethiopia, and coffee ceremonies are huge there, and they were so grateful to us. They did a coffee ceremony for us for adopting the boys, and it was like at 8 p.m. And I was like, I can't drink this now. Like, no way. So I was like pretending to drink it. And they were like, why don't you like it? I was like, it's not that I don't like it. I just want to sleep, So they're very sweet people. Probably the nicest people I've ever met.
What about some of these mushrooms we're seeing in these herbal coffees, Maria? Any thoughts on mushrooms?
The adaptogens? I don't know. I think if that's your thing, go for it. I don't know. I've seen some with like a lot of carbohydrates in there, so I would just be aware of that. But
sure, depends on who you are, what you're looking for, what are your goals.
Right. It's nothing I really recommended to somebody before, but I guess I personally haven't even tried it either on myself either.
Sure. I'd love to jump into labs a little bit, Maria. I'd love to see what are you seeing in terms of patterns on lab results, particularly a lipid panel.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts overall. Obviously, the standard lipid panel isn't enough to get a good idea of somebody's risk factors. But what kind of patterns are you seeing with this?
What kind of patterns I'm seeing when people are doing a very high fat carnivore or ketogenic diet, their lipids get worse because they think that the fat they're eating is just going to shoot through them. You do not want that to happen. You're probably too young for this. Do you remember Wow chips?
Wow chips. Yeah, I am familiar. Yeah.
Okay. So they were made with Olestra.
Yeah.
And
we learned
about
this. Out your fat. Wasn't that the idea?
Yeah. So you only want about 8% of the like the fat that you're eating to go through your stool. Anything more than that is going to give you diarrhea because unless those wow trips had a warning on them, causes anal leakage. And it's because like the percentage only went up to like 10 or 12, but it caused diarrhea. So the fact that they think it just goes through you or it just doesn't get absorbed, that's wrong. There's only two things that, like when you eat a lot of dietary fat, it's either going to go to the fat cells or you're going to burn it for energy. So unless you're like running a marathon, it's going to your fat cells. And when people are doing these, like eating a ribeye with a stick of butter, guess what? Their triglycerides are getting worse, but not only that, their blood sugars are getting worse because insulin is like a net. It's like holding all of the fat in. And so when you eat too much, it's like, ooh, that's stretching that net, right? It's making the fat cell like too big. It can't hold it. So it's going to make your insulin numbers worse too. Like, so that's why I'm very like kind of loud about, we need to lower if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have insulin resistance, you have to lower that fat. You just, it's not, people just think like calories don't matter. I spoke on the low carb cruise and these people were talking about the heavy cream. Like, oh, I'm gaining weight because all of the carbs in the heavy cream. I'm like, no, you're not. It's because you just had like 1,000 calories of pure fat. It's not the 5 carbs that you ate.
So you still need to focus on the kind of like the math equation there, not just, I mean, whole foods are important for our health, but it's like, hey, the calories do still matter. We can't just go crazy on all these fats. So actually what you were just saying about insulin. So if I'm understanding this correctly, having too much fat all the time, like if we're going crazy with the butter and the heavy cream and etc., is it affecting the function of insulin? Like is the insulin not able to function the same way beforehand?
Well, if you're already in that state of you have insulin resistance, it certainly is not going to make it better. It's going to make it worse. If you work with somebody who is an athlete, they're metabolically healthy, sure, especially like if you're lean, you're going to, if you're not eating carbohydrates, fat is going to be your energy source because protein is not, it's great, but it's not a good energy source. You either need carbs or fat. However, most people that are going to hire somebody like us, they are already metabolically damaged. They need help. And their insulin's not already having too much time. It's too stretched. The net is not working anymore. And so adding a bunch of fat is not going to make it all of a sudden heal.
So you're saying, Maria, maybe a little bit focusing on carbs in moderation, complex carbs, maybe your protein. Well, I mean, it's really the balance of it all. That's why we talk about macros.
Right. I'm not saying that you have to go to carbs but what I'm saying is like, if you have a lot of fat on your body, that can be used for energy.
You don't need to add a bunch of fat.
Right.
In the diet.
Right.
Okay.
Well, because a lot of people like carnivore heals. I mean, talking about autoimmune issues, like oxalates, like all the things, you don't need to add in carbohydrates. If you want to, whatever. That's why it's a personal choice. The thing about diet is whatever you can stick to, that's what you got to do. Right. So if somebody told me to eat carnivore when I was 16, I wouldn't even have tried. I would still be on the standard American diet. Right. But for me, it was baby steps and finding out what works for me and how I feel great and energetic. That's what I want to go to.
And I'm curious too about other markers like micronutrients. Do you see a lot of improvement there when people start changing their diet?
A lot because of the whole bioavailability. The last presentation I did at Hack Your Health was I had some bioavailability slides like zinc. Oysters are filled with zinc, right? So that's if you eat them alone. But if you eat them with black beans, you get about 1/3 of the zinc.
Oh, interesting. It's binding.
Is that because of the fiber that's binding? It's phytic acid?
Nutrients, the lectins, anti-nutrients.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All so many different little misconceptions here.
Yeah.
1 per tortilla, you get 0 zinc.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thing about like people worry about if you're not getting the micronutrients in a carnivore diet. Well, if I put a plate of kale in front of you, a plate of blueberries, or a steak in front of you, which one has the most nutrients in it? The steak does. 1,000 times more than kale or blueberries does. And it doesn't have any anti-nutrients like oxalates that the kale has in it. Are you familiar with oxalates?
Yes.
Yeah, those bind to nutrients and they build up in places like your kidneys, causing kidney stones, things like that. So the steak, this is why we eat the carnivore diet, is because my husband got Lyme disease. And this is from a tick. This is nothing we were doing wrong. A tick bit him and he got Lyme disease and he was like trying to manage the pain. And whenever he would have vegetables like cabbage or anything, he would have all of this pain and like a lot. And so just eliminating that, he feels so much better. Am I 100% carnivore meat? No, but I do feel the best when I eat that way. My digestion's good. The things like people are like, what about the fiber? Don't you need fiber to poop? Think about a newborn baby. They don't get any fiber and they poop all the time.
It's a good point.
And if you think about people with diverticulitis, Crohn's, or colitis, the first thing you want to do is cut out the fiber, right? Fiber is an irritant to that intestine. Why don't we just cut it out before it's an irritant? The colon needs hydration. It doesn't need fiber. So where's that hydration coming in? Sodium.
So what does carnivore look like for you, Maria? Is it leaner proteins and then is it a little bit of fruit? I'm somewhat, ignorant on this, on kind of how we can adapt carnivore.
I personally don't eat fruit. Paul Saladino got brought fruit into the carnivore diet. I don't think that's an animal product. Right. He's the one that did that. It's not a carnivore thing, but carnivore is, anything from an animal. So it could be, dairy is from an animal. So if you do dairy, that is, but usually when I work with somebody who wants to do carnivore for weight loss, no dairy. So it would be like leaner proteins. But again, we didn't eat just one part of the animal. So the argument that, some people are like, eat the ribeyes and the butter, right? Well, if you think about nature, most of the animals in the wild are very lean, like deer, moose, rabbit. Like we didn't just pick the fatty part of it and eat that and throw the rest away. We ate a lot of it, and a lot of it was lean, including the organs. So if you want the true superfood, it's not resveratrol or whatever. It's organ meat. That's the true superfood.
I love that you brought this up because I'm thinking about organ meats as kind of nature's multivitamins recently. And there's a lot of freeze-dried organ supplements on the market now. Obviously, if we can eat the whole food, if it's fresh, if it's humanely sourced, that's going to be the best option, right? But do you ever support or promote freeze-dried supplements for organs?
Yep, I do. Yeah. I take many. Yeah.
Cool.
I bow hunt. Hope I don't offend anybody, but I do bow hunt in my yard. And so when I do, harvest an animal, we do eat the whole thing, but it's not often. And so just supplemental daily, there's a couple organs that I like, and they all have different benefits. The more like different nutrients and stuff, but like liver, it's like the super multivitamin. I don't like to eat liver. My mom does. So I was like, I just didn't pick up on that.
Did you say bow hunt or bull hunt? Bow and arrow.
Oh, wow.
This is just getting more and more interesting, Maria. And
I gotta tell you, like when
you're so cool.
Why? I posted a picture of the deer I shot last year, and I think I lost like 3,000 followers in an hour. And I got this comment from a woman saying, you should be like the rest of us civilized humans and buy your meat at the store.
Wow.
If you go to
so inhumane. The way that we're processing meat is so inhumane and not it's a really crazy like business. I feel like meat production here. It's actually I was going to ask you, like, are there any farms like for us that don't hunt ourselves, or we just don't live that lifestyle currently? Are there any farms that you suggest like ordering from? I know there's some good like regenerative farms that I order from online. Like what's kind of your take there?
My favorite one is Colorado Craft Beef. They are on Instagram. They are the nicest people. She is so they made some beef sticks that they make in-house. And the ingredients are on there. I was on a flight to Thailand and I was like, I still had to eat it because I lived like 30 hours, right? I was so hungry. It had molasses in it. And I was like, oh, I messaged her. I was like, do you really have to have molasses? She's like, no, it's in the smoke that we use. And so they immediately changed it to a better process, but it's all humanely raised, regeneratively. And that's the thing, like people think that like a vegan diet is the best for the earth. It's really not. And do you know how many animals died when you like made that field into like soybean fields or whatever crop you wanted? Like you killed so many birds, you killed way more animals than when I take one animal for a year for my family, right? So I don't know. There's just a lot to that.
a lot of misinformation and I think misunderstanding.
Mhm.
You need those regenerative animals for the plants to grow.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I do want to ask too, I know that you were able to reverse your own PCOS and IBS through your own healing journey. And you just mentioned your husband's Lyme disease as well. So that makes me curious, are there other conditions that you've been able to help others kind of work through? I know I kind of said earlier, like people can often feel victim to their diagnosis. So what other conditions that maybe are even labeled as uncurable or untreatable, kind of how your PCOS was, that you've been able to see improvement with?
You name it. Migraines. I've seen people, Hashimoto's go into remission, get off medication, Graves' disease, get off medication, multiple sclerosis, go from a wheelchair to walking. You name it. Like, I am just shocked. And that's why I'm just so passionate. And obviously, like, it's not a competition. Getting people off processed food that's what's most important. But I also feel like we are eating, like, when you look at what people are eating, it's just way too many carbohydrates, not enough protein. It's just not the ideal diet. So yeah, I'm trying to think of like skin disorders. I've posted a few pictures of people like with the worst skin disorders, and changing not only their diet, but adding in a few like healing supplements, like in like days. And they were on like injectable type steroids
Wow.
for issues. And that was like $3,000 a month for them. And just changing their food and adding some cheap supplements like disappeared.
Amazing. What about challenges with, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but how do you help people overcome some hurdles when they're transitioning to, say, a carnivore diet?
Some people think, well, one hurdle could be cost. They think it's going to cost too much. But when you break it down, most people save money. First of all, because the amount of food they're eating is probably not as much. The intermittent fasting is naturally happening. They're not snacking all the time. I mean, chips and cereal and milk and all that's very expensive, and all these snacks.
Sure.
But when you have a good way to do it is get like a half a cow from a farmer that you trust, fill your freezer, and that's going to last you, a year, half a year, your whole family. So cost could be one thing. Peer pressure could be another one. And that's why like surrounding yourself with like-minded people and like support people like you guys that can lift you up and make you feel good. That's why we do, like you mentioned, the Facebook group. It's a free group that people are just, it's a support group. So people feel, because people around you are probably not going to eat like this, maybe, right? Maybe not until you are like a representative and inspiration to them. I will say, like, I live in a bubble. I work from home. I homeschool children. We live in the woods where I bow hunt. When I spoke on the low-carb cruise or like anywhere, when you get outside, especially like a cruise ship where you're like, whoa, what are people eating, right? My boys are like, geez, the people are eating ice cream at 9 a.m. and stuff. Like, it's helpful to have support around you that eat like you or talk like you or feel like you. So again, like just the free groups like that.
Yeah, support is everything. I feel like your environment is so influential and powerful, especially in like a time where you're trying to try something new, transition to something, break habits that you've had for 20, 30, 40, 50 years sometimes.
This is why I love that you do the podcast. I'm an introvert and stuff, but I love that you do these podcasts because when people are feeling low or like not supportive, just throw your, some earphones on and like listen, go for a walk and be like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this for a reason. I want to feel amazing. Because I do think that here's another thing too, a hurdle, your cravings, right? But if you give yourself, I think people, if you give them, 14 days and be like, in 14 days, you have a new set of taste buds, you will change what you crave. So 14 days is a short period of time. But if you tell them you can never have a whatever again, they're like, oh, geez, right? But say 14 days, you can't have whatever their chocolate. I don't know what they're craving, right? But for 14 days, you can't have it. After 14
That's really
days,
motivating.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It does. Your taste buds change, right? But cravings are huge. But if you're eating it day after day after day, it's, it's going to be hard to cut. Cut it out for 14 days.
And I do want to talk about too, I know we're kind of coming up close on the hour here, but I did want to talk about mental well-being because we've talked so much about like physical changes and how the ketogenic or carnivore approach can affect us physically, from our blood sugar to insulin response and etc. But how can just changing your diet, cutting out the processed food, switching over to a whole food diet, ketogenic, carnivore, what have you, how can that positively impact our mental well-being?
Oh man, there's so many layers to this. Like depression and anxiety and, bipolar, they all like come from different things. It could be a histamine response. And with histamines, we have to cut out the histamines, eat fresh meat, things like that. But if like there's definitely a gluten connection, because gluten has this cellular mimicry to what it looks like to serotonin in our brain. So like cutting out gluten is a huge one to our mental wellness, but keeping your blood sugar stable is a huge thing to mental wellness. Just think about like little kids, when they're throwing tantrums for like sugar or whatever, but like blood sugar is really important to that. Gosh, there's a lot of parts. A magnesium deficiency can cause a lot of anxiety, and you need more magnesium, the more sugar. I think you need like 4 grams of magnesium per gram of sugar you eat. So if you're eating the standard American, everybody's deficient in magnesium, causing a lot of anxiety. Dairy can be another one that causes an autoimmune issue that can be like either depression or anxiety. So cutting out dairy and gluten is important. And, keeping your blood sugar stable. I know that there's quite a bit of carnivores out there that are very loud about how they would be on medication for bipolar disorder if they ate not carnivore foods. One place I was eating with one of the carnivores, her name's Amber. When we had burger patties, she's like, is there any seasoning besides salt on them? Because if there is, I can't, because then she would need medication. But if she eats pure carnivore, she's fine.
So it was like that, that small of an amount of an herb could really trigger that in someone. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I see it with a few people that's why they just eat just from the earth, pure animals, no spices, anything like that. There's like, if you think about peppers, like bell peppers and things like that, or like cumin or cayenne pepper, that's in some seasonings, right? And that's a nightshade, and nightshade can cause migraines, pain, joint pain, things like that, arthritis. So just being like familiar with what food causes what. And again, some people don't want to go to an all elimination diet. The ultimate elimination protocol is like a carnivore level 1, but finding out like what they have, what their goals are. If it's just weight loss, that's easy for me. I don't make anybody do carnivore because they don't have to. But if they have a lot of autoimmune issues or pain, then I'm going to pick out a lot of things.
And going back to the topic of community, tell us about your health retreats.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. I don't get paid for these, but it's just something that like I look forward to. It's just like my happiest place on earth. I get to explore the world. And if you want to, or just learn more, I don't make anybody eat keto or carnivore, but like I have type 1 diabetics. They have to eat that way. And so they're always offered like keto food, or if they're carnivore, they will be offered carnivore food. But we get to explore the world, like we go surfing or hiking, or, there's Italy retreats and we go sailing and things like that. So yeah, if anybody's interested, it's just, I've made the most, you never know who's going to come on these retreats, right? But I made like the coolest people, and I still talk to them every day. Sometimes they come and visit me still, but it's a really cool way to meet like-minded people and learn. Some people will bring a friend that's not keto and they don't eat keto on the trip. They're having gelato, but the next time I meet them, they're like, super keto and like half their size. So it's cool.
I love that you're bringing like-minded people together. It's so important, I think, in this kind of healing space to just have support and to find your people. And speaking of that, where else can we find you if we want to connect with you? If anyone listening in wants to look into some of your books, some of your work with you, where can we find you online?
If you go to ketomaria.com, that's the best place. And if you go like all the way to the bottom, you'll find the free Facebook groups. There's different ones for carnivore, keto, sugar-free kids, you name it. You'll also find link to my YouTube where I usually cook for you, show you a day of my life, that type of stuff. Or the retreats are on there too. But thank you so much. And there's like a free ebook too. You don't have to buy a book. There's a free one on there. But I just appreciate this so much.
Speaking of a day in the life, before we say goodbye, real quick, I have to ask Maria, what are some of your favorite go-to recipes
right
now? Because I'm sure it's evolved.
Like a dog, I could eat the same thing. It really it's wild. Yeah. I mean, I wake up and after I work out, I'll have I usually have a filet mignon or a tenderloin steak, and I make my steak sauce recipe, which is a carnivore steak sauce. It's only 3 ingredients. It's very good. That's on YouTube if you want to make it. So that will be like my breakfast. It'd be very simple. If I'm still hungry, I'll have some yogurt, just plain yogurt. Again, that's carnivore. And then my lunch varies a little bit, but it's usually halibut. I really like halibut. Again, I have a sauce with that. Maybe some mushrooms, because mushrooms are kind of like this carnivore thing because they're not a plant the way they,
interesting.
They're a fungus,
Yeah.
right? So maybe some of that. And then for dinner, it could be I have this bread recipe. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's it's a carnivore. It's all protein. It's where you whip egg whites. Have you heard this?
I have.
Oh,
Yes.
I've seen this. Yeah, I've seen that. And you bake it, right?
What's that?
And you bake it, you whip the egg whites and you bake it, and it gets kind of fluffy.
It gets really fluffy. It's like Wonder Bread. It's super soft. And so either a burger with that or just, I don't know, egg sandwich. I usually have my eggs towards the evening. And the more I learn about them, there's melatonin in eggs. So I don't,
I
so
love
I don't know
this.
if that helps me to sleep. And I usually make, I don't know if you've heard of Equip protein powder. It's made from beef.
I haven't
I haven't heard of
that
it
one.
yet. Yeah.
I really like it. I'll maybe make a little treat with that. So I usually have 3 meals. I used to always only have 2, but yeah, I don't know. Usually mix it up.
I think it's helpful to hear that. And
Yeah.
I'm going to check out your steak sauce recipe on YouTube now.
Do you like truffle?
I do.
There's some truffle salt in there.
Ooh, yes.
Just a little bit to give it a little bit of a, it's really, do you know what brown butter is?
Yes.
So I brown the butter first.
That sounds
really-
fancy and wonderful and delectable.
And I just keep it in the fridge. And so I just throw it on the steak whenever I want one.
Beautiful. I'm glad
Thank
I squeezed that question in. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to go. I actually, in prep for this podcast too, I was looking over your YouTube channel. You have so many recipes on there that I feel like I need to go, binge watch your whole YouTube channel and kind of look into these. So I'm really excited for that. And Maria, this has been such an amazing episode. We haven't really gone into the carnivore diet and ketogenic approach in great detail, especially with someone like you that's been on this diet for 27 years, I think you mentioned. So thank you so much for bringing just your perspective and expertise and inspiration and just sharing your message with us today. I think we're going to take a lot out of this episode. And to anyone tuning in, I wish you all vibrant health and wellness until next week.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.